Namaste, hello. We don't really want to talk about spiritual stuff now. We want to talk about the Colombia win at the World Cup. Right? Right? Oh well, maybe not. All right. So I thought we'll open the floor for questions and answers a little bit today. I had an interview today, a radio interview, and the interviewer asked me if our true nature is that profound love and peace of enlightenment. Why do we have to deal with all the darkness and all the suffering in the world? And my answer was, because only when we do can we experience the supreme victory of overcoming all this. And only because there's darkness will we actually experience the light. Only because there's fear will we really experience the love we're capable of. That is, in short, why the world exists. But the sense of victory, I mean, I'm actually coming off the soccer thing, about victory and so on. The sense of victory is really profound. And she also asked me, if a guru can just liberate you, and if they could, they wouldn't do it, because they would not take from us that profound victory that we're capable of. And we spoke on about, she read in my book somewhere that the overcoming of darkness is not a difficult thing. And when we look at the magnitude of darkness, that's hard to see. On the other hand, we can't close our eyes of that darkness, of the great suffering of humanity. These are just bits and pieces of this conversation that kind of stayed with me. Suffering gives us the determination to find the end of suffering. So it's very important to be exposed to suffering, but it doesn't have to be our own. If it's our own, it certainly will give us this desire for freedom. But we can also open to seeing the suffering in another person's face, or the suffering in humanity. We have plenty of opportunity for that. You don't need to be glued to the TV to know what's going on in parts of the world, and to know that always what gets me, which never makes the news, that there are 5,000 children a day dying of starvation on this planet, that we are just not paying attention to. We don't want to see it. So the exposure to that suffering is very important, because it gives us a drive. It gives us the urgency of our desire for freedom. Because why freedom? It could be service, which is a path to freedom. But freedom, our enlightenment, is the most profound way to contribute to humanity. If everyone would just on this planet, or let's say a certain number of people would just go up a notch in their vibratory rate, which is something that may actually be happening as we speak. But if that happens, the whole planet vibratory rate would shift. Humanity would shift in some way, right? And that doesn't mean you would see it everywhere, but you would see it in the whole. You would have a sense of that. And there's a way you can tune into these kind of things sometimes. I remember, I don't know, I'm going from thing to thing here, but I remember watching the moon landing with my dad on TV. And it was a moment like this where, like, at the time, I think it was 1 billion people watching this, which was like unheard of, more than the soccer World Cup, can you imagine? And it was this moment where everyone watching this knew that something really unheard of, something very big was happening as Armstrong went off that ladder and touched the moon. And there was a sense of humanity coming together as one in that moment, just for a moment. You know, it's just this, oh, at that moment of something is happening, right? Where you could feel that collective spirit that we do have. And shifts in that spirit are never produced by the majority. The majority is always set in its ways, kind of like cement. But it's the people on the fringes, like us, the people who are trying something new, who can bring into that, inject into that, something that has to do with the heart, that has to do with awareness. So this is what each one of us is called for. I spoke of the revolution of love, and that's not a empty formula or a cool new age thing to say. That is very real. And the beautiful thing of that is that we don't have to do anything but create a revolution of love in our lives, which is already what we want. So, there's of course many people on the planet who are not aware of that that's what they want. They want money, they want stuff. But there's enough of us that are aware that the greatest value, the greatest richness we can possibly experience comes from right here. So the beauty of that is that we don't have to create a revolution like, oh, we're going to go into battle now for this great new idea. No, we just have to do it here, each one of us. I just got an email a few minutes ago, this woman in Australia I'm working with, and I had one session with her. She's in my mentoring program. I had one session with her, and that first session, when the space is open, includes an initiation into HeartSourcing, so we did that. And she just wrote me back saying that she has this, since then, it's like, this was Friday, right? Since then, she has these incredible experiences where she, tears come to her eyes and her heart just opening. That's somebody who's like really ready. But whether you're ready for that or whether it takes some work, some chiseling away at some old crust around the heart, it doesn't matter. Because the victory is in the heart, waiting for you to grab it like a trophy, So, we have the grace to have the awareness of the possibility of that opening into love, that we are capable of that. Let's grasp it. Let's do whatever we can to make it happen in our lives. What else is there to do that is more important, really? The greatness of our situation is that we have a human body without which you cannot really find enlightenment. The human body is the unique vehicle for that. Why? Because in the human world, there are two factors that are crucial. One is that there's enough suffering to motivate us to change. And as I said, we can use the suffering of others. We don't have to wait until it happens to us. And the second thing is that we have the time and the means, the leisure time. We have an understanding that this dharma, this growth, this transformation is possible for us. In the old stories, I don't want to say this because it could be heard like a threat, but it is not. They say you don't know when you're going to get that chance again. You don't know how you're going to be reborn next time. It could be a horse or a dog. It could be in another place where that awareness is not there. So let's grab this opportunity, let's grab this chance. It's given to us like a precious, precious gift. So, any questions on this journey? Any comments? Have a conversation today. Please.
Do you think that meditation gives us the chance to be in stillness, to become more aware? Isn't meditation important for everybody to be able to experience that?
So the question is if meditation is important for everyone to experience the stillness and the peace. Meditation is certainly one powerful method, but it is not the only way to experience peace and to be in touch with your inner self and really know that. Some measure of stillness is important for us to even be able to tune into what's going on inside of us, because the mind connected with the senses by nature always flows outward, right? So if we just leave the mind and the senses to their own ways, then our attention is going to be always focused outward and we are not really self-aware. So somehow we need to come to us. But I'm reminded that this is Florida, where I used to live was sort of in the country, and there's all these people who go out fishing. And I'm sure most of them think it's about the fish. Well, maybe not. Maybe there's many that know that they go out there to have a moment of peace. To be in this natural environment, on the water. And to let go of thinking. Maybe it happens to them in moments, I'm sure it does. So being in nature is a very important thing. You know, it's like, you think of all the different cultures that we had on the planet that aren't aware of meditation as a technique because it's not part of their lineage. Well, they had sages there too. I'm thinking of the Native Americans. You know, they just had a profound relationship with nature that took them deep into that internal space. And there are many examples of that, you know. In our work, the work of Byron Katie, for instance, is something that we do with the mind, but it's a meditation in itself. So that is a way of clearing the mind with the mind. You can do it on a worksheet, but the effect is that of a powerful meditation, of getting free of toxic thoughts and beliefs. So there's many different ways. There was a man who was a very, very close student of my guru, devotee of my guru. His name was Dada. He was so tuned in that we would hang out with him somewhere in the ashram in some room, and he'd sneak away from Maharaji to have a little cigarette because that was his thing. And he'd be there smoking, and suddenly he'd like get up and he'd head out the door. And when he was just through the door, we heard Maharaji yelling for him, "Dada!" from the other side of the ashram. right? He was so tuned in, he was already on the way before that came, you know? And he said to me personally, he said, I never crossed my legs in my life. This is maybe an overstatement, but it wasn't his thing to meditate. He was so devoted to his guru that does the same job. It's like he emptied himself out into service. So there's many different ways. Maharaji was asked, how should we meditate? And he said, meditate like Jesus. Oh, so we're with the real guy who really knows this stuff. You know, now we can get some information here, right? Forget the, prime meditation technique that Jesus used, and we're going to do it, right? And so we went back the next day and we said, how did Jesus meditate? And Maharaji just closed his eyes and became really still, so still that the whole world stopped. And then some tears came running down his cheek. He opened his eyes and he said, he lost himself in love. That wasn't exactly what we expected as a technique, because we were ready for heroic yogic feats. But it was the most profound answer we could have received. Because that moving inward brings us to one of three aspects of the higher self. Either just absolute existence, this being fully in the moment. No thought, just being absolutely present. It can bring us to awareness itself, the awareness in which all of creation arises, which is our true being. And it can bring us to all-encompassing absolute love. These three are aspects of what we truly are. So these are like three paths, three different personalities feel attracted to in different ways to the true self, right? And then everyone travels along a trajectory of that particular quality. So we have teachers who teach the power of now, right? That's Sat, being. That's completely a complete way to enlightenment. Then you have others, like the teachers of the Jnana Yoga tradition, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, Papaji and his students. That's the questioning of the mind, and it brings us to awareness. This awareness in which the world is seen and arises, which is our awareness. And then there's the tradition of love and service, which brings us to that love, to the blissful aspect of our being. So, no, meditation is not necessary, but it's very helpful. And if you feel drawn to meditate, by all means. For me, it was crucial. It was the first skill, consciousness skill that I found, and I just saw how much of my suffering it relieved very quickly. But I had to go through it and out of it, Sometimes you can use meditation also as a way of escaping and bypassing things, but that doesn't lead to any kind of real solution. If you're online, feel free to send us a question as well.
How can we discriminate when life sends us like a shift, like a turn around the corner? How can we how can we discriminate of what it is the message, what it is the lesson, or what we are supposed to learn from that change or shift, or yeah.
The question is, when there's a change in life, how we're supposed to determine what the message is or which way to go, I guess you're saying, right?
Like that part of us that can discriminate or discern how to take what life brings us.
Right.
If I can take it as something I need to act upon, or if it's just something that is brought to me by life in order to assert my present moment, or I really don't know how much to say.
I want to first answer this in a very mundane way that doesn't really apply to you, I don't think. But I have seen bad advice being given by more or less well-meaning friends. And the typical situation is a woman is in a relationship and has some problems, and then talks to her girlfriends. It's just, I've seen this so many times, I have to just get it off my chest. I have to talk about it. Talks to her girlfriend. Men don't do that because they're just not really skillful talking about the relationships. So this happens much less with men. But women are, very tuned into the fabric of relationships. And then, they talk to their girlfriends about what they should do, and this and that happens. And the girlfriends, generally speaking, often well-meaning, tune into their own problems with their husbands or boyfriends. And the anger comes into that, or the frustration comes into that, and the lack of skill that they themselves have and can't see in themselves but project onto their partners. And then it becomes sort of a, let's get even with the guys thing. And I've seen marriages break up that really did not have to break up because of that kind of bad advice. So the first thing that I need to say to this is beware of who you're talking to about this kind of stuff, right? And bad advice can be given with the best of intentions. The fact is that all of us aren't so great at relationships when we start out with the conditioning we receive from this culture. As a matter of fact, we're lousy. I don't have to point to a 70% divorce rate to prove this. It's obvious. Even the marriages that stay together, there's so much suffering. It's horrendous. Because we're not taught the right skills that we need to make a relationship work. So the first thing is be aware who you're talking to and get good advice if you want advice at all. But I think your question wasn't really asking how do I get advice, but how do I determine the truth? How do I listen to my internal knowing, right? And we spoke about this before, that you take a situation where you have to make a decision, and you frame the questions you have about that into simple questions that simply require a yes or no answer. That yes or no answer you do not have to decide on, because there is a place in you that knows the answer. There's already a yes or a no. It's like, should I take this job? Should I take this job? Yes or no? And then you have to become still. Now the mind is going to say blah 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 blah, whatever it says, this and that, and the money is this way, and I need the security, and forget all that. You're not going to get the truth from there. because that's just the mind, the thinking mind trying to figure it out. Go to the intuitive intelligence, which we might locate if we want to locate it anywhere. It doesn't need to be located, but it's more in the heart. It's like deeper. Listen to the voice of the heart. There's already a yes or a no there. And employment situations or employment interviews are really a great place to kind of train that. They say, the typical scenario, you're going into an employment interview and there's some person there who's going to interview you. And you're like alert because, this is like a big decision coming up. If you think back at situations like that you went through, isn't it true that something inside of you already knew before you even went through the door whether this was the right job for you or not? That there was already a feeling there that knew, yes, this is great, this is a match or not. If you really look at that, you will most likely see it, that there was some intuitive knowing that was already there. But then the head comes in and it argues and it has fears and it has concerns and it has desires, and we lose touch with that inner knowing. So the answer is to become still. And also, going even a step deeper, it's like the decision's already made. Your decision's already made. You're just sort of running after it to try to figure it out, what the decision is. Now, I don't know, this may or may not work for you, that kind of thinking. But when you know that, it's like you can smile at things. Because you don't have to get upset. You may actually, the decision may be to get the job that is not good for you. But that's impossible. Because the job that's not good for you, when you take it, is exactly the perfect job for you because you need to learn that. And you can use that for relationships, you can use that for any moment in life. You can use that for, should I do the dishes now? There's a yes or no here already. Let that guide you. And more life becomes automatic in the most beautiful of ways. Not like you're a zombie, but it's like you're letting God live your life. And God is you. Katie says it this way. She says, we are being lived. Isn't it amazing to watch that? How we're being lived. And when you have that sense of being lived, it allows you to relax and to notice that witnessing mind that's just there watching you live your life. That little Durga character living her life. And you can love her fully. And there she is, and she's all worried about something. And that witnessing mind, that loving witnessing mind, just watches this and says, look at me, all tied up in worries. And it's like you're not taking it so dreadfully serious. And a lightness comes with that. And a playfulness and a joy that is really yours. So I hope this is helpful. But the key is to become still enough, and with practice that can be done spontaneously throughout your day. More and more you can ask this question, or you can just tune in. There's a state of mind which is sometimes called flow, and athletes go into that. And it's like when you see a great basketball. This is why I like basketball, because you can see it there. You can see it in other sports too, but in basketball it's like very obvious. There's some people who just can't miss. They get into that zone and they're just on. And you can live like that. You don't have to shoot hoops. It can be just about washing the dishes or cooking the food or driving someplace, and you're just in the flow of things. Your heart is open, your mind is clear, and you're watching yourself being lived. And every part of it is a blessing, is a moment of, oh, how amazing. Live in a sense of awe in the face of God as you living this life. Now, I have no idea whether this gives you anything really practical to work with, but yeah, we'll see.
For me in this way, for come to Florida for this experience, it was one of the biggest experiences in my life. I come more and more to my trust. The things will come in the right moment. When it's not working right now, this is not working in this moment. And sometimes I have to give up, and sometimes I have to cry. And I when cry, I was open for something new. Before I hold my focus only about this one, what I want.
Yeah.
And in this point, I was not open for left or right, but everything around me was still there. And I gave up. I started to cry. And in this moment, I realized, in a lot of situations last year, mostly last year, I gave up. I was open. And the new things comes greater, nicer than I couldn't believe before.
Isn't it like meditation and action, that kind of going to that place of stillness? If you get into a practice in the beginning of, for me, what I'm trying to do here, of learning how to meditate, it brings me into that depth of the heart. And therefore, when I'm out in the real world dealing with real life situations, I can access it at a quicker pace.
Yeah.
I know where to go. Even, I was on a trip and there were moments when I literally would be in the middle of a conversation and say, excuse me, 1 second. I would just kind of look down, get still, go to that place, and I would find that wisdom answer instead of the answer coming from
That's
my head.
very important, because we're so conditioned to come to snap answers or snap reactions. And we really need to slow this thing down, this process of life. And this is very difficult in a world. Well, maybe it's not all that difficult, but the world makes us speed up and speed up and speed up. And we have a telephone and we have this and that. All these machineries attached to us, and somewhere we have to slow down. And maybe things are speeding up more and more to such an extent that we actually notice we have to slow down. But in that slowing down, we don't have to become passive. So you focus, you calibrate your moment, you have a sense of what is a more heart-based answer to this moment, right? And in that way, you open the path again to go back, to continue in the flow, rather than in this sort of staccato method of, being subjected to your desires and fears, which is what we all know, and we don't want to live there. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you your experience or how you approach loss in your life, like a death, somebody very close to you, because I'm about to go travel out of state to go to a funeral of a stepmother. She was really like my second mother, a woman that has been in my life since my earliest memories as from childhood. And she married my father and gave him a wonderful life, and it was just a wonderful, warm woman. But she had a very painful end to her life. She basically starved herself or didn't eat or drink for 10 days or 12 days. And then that's how she died. So I want to go there, and I want to be in the right frame of mind and
First of all,
and not get lost in the sadness,
when someone does that at the end of life, you have to understand what that is. She didn't need to eat or drink. She was ready to go. Then your interest in food and drink, which is to maintain life, it just goes away.
So she wasn't starving herself? Because she
I had
was
a
100
friend-
pounds. She was like nothing left to her.
Yeah, but that's all our thinking about that, right? So we had a friend, my ex-wife and I had a friend who was in her late 90s, wonderful lady who lived in a little house by the beach, and we would go and visit and hang out with her. Wonderful woman. And one day, I think it was, they took her driver's license away because of her eyesight was going bad. And she just looked at that. She was one of the original students of Ouspensky in Paris. Wherever, I mean, I don't know, quite remember the story, but she was in that teaching. So she was one of those early spiritual people who before this was the thing to do, right? Long before. And so she had a very good self-awareness about her. And they took her license away, and she looked at it, and she just decided, that was it. And she stopped eating. I don't know about drinking, but she just decided this was it. And her body continued to move for a number of days. Then she stayed in bed, and she was very peaceful about the whole thing. And then she died. Just like that. Just like a conscious decision. Right?
Mm.
And we were really privileged. Her family came, but we were able to really play a big role in that passing of our friend. And so the first thing when somebody does that at the end of the life, they stop eating, they stop drinking, it's like their soul goes somewhere else. They're no longer concerned about their body. This is our concerns. But we should understand and honor that space, that transitional space, right? So that's the first thing. So you don't really have to burden yourself with, it was so horrible for her. Well, it would be bad for you not to eat and drink for 10 days. But she was in a completely different state, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when you lose somebody, like in your case with your stepmother, who is really precious for you, give yourself all the human emotions that come up. If you cry, you cry. If you have pain about it, feel it deeply, right? Don't push it away. Let yourself embrace this moment. So that would be the first thing that I would advise you to do, really to allow yourself to have your feelings. And understand that what you're crying about, what would you be crying about if you were to cry about this? Tell me.
I'm never going to see her again. And, she was a very sweet, loving person. And just all the memories of her throughout my entire life.
So we really cry for ourselves. I'm not going to see her again. That sort of thing, right? But there are some tricks to this. There are some things that are really good to know. First of all, life happens. Things change. People are born and people die. And if we cannot live in peace with that, we have a problem. Life doesn't. Right? So there is many things, good things to be said about working on coming to the point where we can accept the flow of life, where we can accept someone's passing. And even if it was a child that died, to understand that everyone dies exactly at the right moment. So, this shouldn't have happened. Here is the funeral, the corpse. And people say, this shouldn't have happened. Well, who is crazy here? You see, this is crazy thinking. There it is. The evidence is it should have happened because it happened. So these things happen because they're right to happen at that moment. But we forever tell ourselves story, oh, she shouldn't have died, this shouldn't have happened, he shouldn't have said that. It's all just crazy making mind stuff. So we need to distinguish that, for our own sake, our own sanity. Right? We need to consider what is sane thinking and what is insane thinking. And we're being taught a lot of insane thinking. If I say he shouldn't have died, what am I saying? Reality should be different. That has never been possible ever, and will never be possible, right? So we create then this drama of grief, and there are these subtle thought patterns that say, oh, if I don't grieve, if I don't suffer, that means I didn't love her. Well, I would question that. Is that really so? Not in my experience. When my father died, it was an incredibly wonderful experience. And I know some people would hear me say that and think I'm really weird, right? But why shouldn't he die, in his case, at 92? But it's true for anyone dying at any age, right? It's just the question is, are we clear in our mind? So my father died, there were some circumstances that were just amazing. The love that happened in that moment. Actually, I'll tell you, when I was with him the last time, he was in Germany, right? I live here. So I went to visit him, and he kept saying there was this deep, powerful love between us, especially at night when he would go to sleep, and I would sort of hunker down by his bed, and there was his face, and there was my face, and there was this great love between us, just like a thick substance, And then he would say, I just want to die in your arms, because we all knew it was close. He said that many times, and we both knew it was not likely to happen, because in 3 days I was going to leave, right? Go an ocean away. And then about 2 or 3 months later, it was a Sunday evening, and I was alone at home, and I was thinking of him. And I had this feeling right the way it was when I used to say goodnight to him. And there was his face, and here was my face, and there was this great love between us, and we had this moment. I just felt that again, really tangibly. It was so real. And then I spent the rest of the evening just looking at photographs and so on, And then it was maybe 4 o'clock in the morning because of the time difference. My mother called, who lived with him in that home, and said he never woke up. So he did die in my arms. I didn't have to be there physically, because his spirit was no longer physically bound to the body. He came, and we had this communion of love. So that was the moment of his death, which I didn't know, of course, at the time. It was just a moment of love. And that didn't change. Then I traveled over there, and I put on the big funeral, right? I did the whole thing. We didn't have a priest anyway. I am that. So I put on this funeral, and there was all his friends, and he was an artist, and he was known. So there was a lot of people there. My mother was there. And I spoke about the completion of this relationship that was so profoundly joyous and loving, the end of this relationship, I thought. And then they cremated his body. And I hung around there. This is like the funny thing in our culture is that it's all like hidden. You can't even see the cremation. In America, I think it's more possible in some funeral homes. But I couldn't see it, but I was just there. I was in the space. In India, of course, that happens out in the open. There's a funeral pyre, there's the corpse on it, there are ceremonies that the family does around the corpse, and it's considered to be highly auspicious if nobody cries. And this is not about repression, it's about knowing that this spirit is now no longer suffering. Big thing for you. She's no longer suffering. That's a reason for joy. If you love them, right? Now then the next thing that happened was really astonishing me, and I'm telling you this because that could happen with your mother-in-law. This could happen with any loved one of us that dies. Because I didn't have grief, and this is a big because I did not have grief, and I was just aware of the magnificence and of the love between my father and I. Suddenly I would think of him, and I now knew that the body was no longer there, and I found him here. I would think of my father, and he was inside of me. That connection was so intimate. And there was no rupture in the love. There was no rupture in the relationship. As a matter of fact, I was relieved that I no longer had to worry about his physical body, which was really hard for him to carry around the last 2 years of his life. He died at 92. So he was ready to die, and that of course made it much easier for me to tell this story now, to have had that experience, right? So I had another experience. This was the first time one of my students passed away. She was a woman who came to me a long time ago, I think in the 80s she came to me when I had my counseling office, and said she was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she wanted to consciously process her dying process with somebody, and she couldn't do it with her family because the family was too attached and too freaked out. She couldn't talk to them about it.
Wow.
So she came to me. She was given 6 months to live by the doctors. She lived 8 more years. And during those 8 more years, we continued our relationship, and it became really deep. I remember visiting her at the hospital when death was imminent already, and we had just a wonderful, wonderful connection. And then they actually took her home, and she passed away at her home 2 days later. The next day, I was sitting in her kitchen with her sister and her best friend who had flown in. Best friend, your lifelong friend. And we're sitting in this kitchen, the 3 of us. We're talking about her. And because I had this relationship with her, which was about her dying for 8 years already, you know, I didn't have any grief. I was ready for that.
Was she ready?
I'm sorry?
Was she ready?
I think she was ready. And the 2 ladies were not, her sister and her best friend. They had grief. And then what happened was she was in the room. Her spirit came into the room. And I could feel her presence in this profound joy of being released from this, what had become a prison in her body. Profound joy. It was like having darshan of a saint in this moment, right? And I said to the 2 ladies, yeah, she's here, can you feel it? And it was clear that they couldn't because of their grief. They were involved with their grief, with the belief system of I'm missing her, she is not here. And they could not feel her presence, which was of such refined bliss, that to this day, so this was like maybe in 92 or something like this, to this day I won't forget that feeling of her presence, right? So your mother-in-law died exactly at the right time. Stepmother, sorry. She died exactly at the right time. Your love for her, there's no change. Except you can feel relieved that she's no longer in a body that's not working for her. You just need to close your eyes and you're with her. Unless you cover that up with grief, that capacity. And it may go, your mind may go to past memories, memory images of being with her, or it may just be a present feeling now. So as I'm speaking this, because I just talked to about my dad, he's totally here. I can feel his presence, and it's this relationship of love that I totally enjoy, that has matured since he died. So you see, unless we destroy our connection with them or our perception of the connection is always there, but we can destroy or hinder it through this grief. There can be just an ongoing relationship that gets better and better. I'm having a ball with my father and with my mother too. My mother wasn't quite so present as he was, but I have it with her also. Now, let's look at grief. What is grief?
Isn't grief the sadness? Because you said just feel everything that you want to feel. Let the feelings come in. Well, if that's sadness and grief, I guess it's to a point then. At some point.
But you see, the thing is that if there's something in you that needs to grieve, allow it. But hear what I'm saying anyway, because it's like, let the grief happen, let it spill out of you, and be done with it. And come back to your love.
Don't drown in it. Don't.
Absolutely. You see, we cultivate that. I had this couple that were friends of ours who had a 16-year-old son who was killed in a boating accident. And I offered them some care, so I got to talk to the wife for a few times. And I showed her how there was a path of grief and a path of continuing just in that love for her son, which was deep. And then I saw her make the decision to stay with grief. Why would she do that? Because there's this belief that the grief is proof that I loved him. If I would suddenly take what Ramgiri is saying and I wouldn't have this grief, then I would be insecure about my real love for him. It would be like too easy or something, right? But what is grief really? Let's look at that. Grief is a tantrum with reality.
Not accepting what's happening.
Not accepting what is. You want it your way. That's what grief is. You get angry about not having your way. You turn that inside and it becomes depression and grief. So when you see it that way, it's not all that becoming. And most of all, it's not necessary. But you see what I'm saying, you may hear the truth in that to some extent, but to another extent, you're still conditioned by the grieving response. That's why I'm saying, let it be. It's a part of you that needs help. Don't repress it. Don't go into your head. That would be really toxic. Say, oh, Ramgiri says there's no need for grief. Then you go into your head and you like squelch your reality. That would be really not healthy, right? So if there is grief, allow the grief. Another story about death. I was with my teacher, Marjaya, and her father passed away right there at the ashram where we lived. And she had a big presence, and you could feel like the walls were shaking with her grief. This is like a holy being. How is that possible? It just was there. It was part of her. And I could see how she allowed herself to have that grief. And it went on for a few days, and then it was over. It was just done. It was like there was an energy that had to be spilled. And I didn't see her crying or anything, but you could feel it. We were very tuned in, you know. You could feel it. There was this atmosphere of grief and of pain. It was just there. It had to be spilled. It had to be experienced. And she allowed herself to go fully into it, and then it was over. It was like, boom. One day, you could just see, bang, it was over, and it was done, right? So if that feeling is there, honor it, by all means. But also know that you can wean yourself out of the need for grief over time. You can't do that on the spot, you know. You have to honor who we are also in our conditioning. to say I should be this idealized version of myself would be to do violence to you. But the words that I speak, when you hear, that, then it may slowly seep in. What helped me a great deal was with my parents dying and the fact that I had no grief in either case. Of course, first of all, that they were old, both in the 90s, and they were both ready to die. So that makes it a lot easier than somebody who's young and maybe dies with an accident and so on, But in this case, so life gave me that blessing. It was easy. There was something else I wanted to say, and it came and went. So, yes, that's what it was. Before, about a year or so before my father died, who was the first of my parents to die, I was with Byron Katie shortly after Christmas at an event. And she comes in like, fresh as a daisy, and she does the whole day's work with the group and so on. And then on the next day, just as well as, just totally present and happy and open and beautifully at peace. And then in the middle of a conversation on the second day, it came out that her mother just died like a day before Christmas or after Christmas or so. So just very recent, like a few days. And the whole group did like this, and you're like this, in this state of openness and happiness that we could see you, right? Because nobody could believe it. And she noticed that. She noticed everyone's reaction. So she spoke about her experience. And that was very important for me. That's why I'm speaking to you about my experiences, right? If I wouldn't have had that model, I might have still had the belief that I had to have grief for this thing to be complete or something, right? But she said she was there with her mom, and they were having the time of their lives. It was her and mom in the hospital room, and mom was on painkillers, so there was, that was taken care of. And they would like have this chat and talk and just this great deal of love, and she would do mother's fingernails and so on. So great time, wonderful. And then her sister would come in the room. Oh, my mother is dying. And immediately her mother would get into it with the sister. So Katie would watch this and then just say, okay, I guess it's time for me to go and have a cup of tea at the cafeteria. And she'd go and take care of herself until the sister's visit was kind of over, and she'd come, and sister would leave, mom would calm down, and they'd have a great time again. And then she said when her mother died, there was absolutely nothing happened. So that was important for me, to be in the presence of someone who was capable of that experience. And then later I was capable of that experience with my own parents, right? So it doesn't happen all at once. And then I had a friend, very close friend of mine, who died suddenly from an accident. He was actually 3 years younger than I. And we shared the same birthday, and we were just very close. We had gone to India together a long time ago. And he died in a motorcycle accident like that in India, and it shocked me, and I had grief. And I knew it was about me. I had a tantrum, because we had made plans to meet in India and have a great time. And I was angry about it. My problem. So, you see, you can have the best theories, and they still don't always work. But it's important for us to allow ourselves to be who we are, and in the context of that, find an ever greater truth, which makes life easier and easier, until we get to the point where we really can just accept any moment fully the way it is. And not just accept, but love. Love every moment the way it is. And then life turns into just this event of ongoing bliss and grace. Well, that sounds good to me. Count me in.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go there, just cherishing the love
Exactly.
that I have with her, like my own little jewel in my heart. I'm just going to cherish it.
Exactly. And don't think it's over. Let me know how it goes. But it is not over. Because love is not something that's limited by time and space. You know, if you have two lovers and they're, you know, on the other side of the planet and they feel each other, if they're really in that space of love, absolutely. Absolutely. And so you can have a love affair with someone you've never met. I remember a moment when I was with a girlfriend at the time. And we just had this wonderful weekend to ourselves, you know, just having a wonderful time. And I had a book that had poetry by St. Catherine of Siena. There was different poets, poetry was in there, you know, mystical poets. But she was the one who showed up. And there was just three of us in the room. Through her poetry, you know, not in a form, we couldn't see her, but her presence was unmistakable. And I fell in love with this saint. Amazing, amazing presence. And you know what Jesus said, when two or three are together in my name, I will be right with them. That is literally true if those two or three are open enough to notice it. And that's not just true for Jesus. That's true for St. Catherine of Siena. That's true for my guru. It's true for any truly liberated being, because they leave their bodies. They have already experienced their oneness with the awareness. A picture, awareness, formless awareness, within which this universe of form appears. So they are this awareness, which means they are present everywhere. But when we, individuals, through our love, through the focus of our hearts, focus our intention, our attention at one of these beings, their presence might just manifest right there and then, in whatever way it can. And that can reach from a faint sense of a presence all the way to a physical appearance of someone. And the physical form can be seen as a distant vision or as somebody sitting right there in the room with you. It just depends on the intensity and on how that moment of grace is best lived. You know? And if you ever have a vision of the Virgin Mary, just don't tell anybody, because they're gonna. But you know, that's the craziness, that people have that, and then they're looking for somebody else who had it out. You know, like that would serve them. You know, and yeah, it's okay. It's like a devotional impulse. But the point is that everyone can have these experiences. Everyone has a direct line to the Virgin Mary or to any other realized being of their choice, right here, from here to there. Because there is here.
Thank you.
Anything else, or should we talk about soccer again? How are you doing?
Well,
Clean?
yes,
Good for you.
yeah, doing a lot of work, you know, shadow work we talked about. I guess that would be my question. It's more specific to me in this particular case, but that somehow for a long time I've read about and practiced certain types of shadow work, healing the onion, integrating, whatever. But I noticed that I somehow got the idea that in the process you're re-experiencing or re-feeling a lot of these things from the past. And this time what I'm doing the dissolving the monster formula method that you offered, and a couple other things incorporated in there. And it's not like that. It's actually it's been like a lightning, there's a joyful thing happening, and so my interpretation is, well, I'm not doing shadow work. I'm not really dissolving things. I'm not allowing them to come up and be freed.
So what's your experience?
It's a feeling of physical stuff, physical tensions that are released, but without a emotional component. There's not this sadness that comes up, or this old grief, or this old feeling that I can't explain, or anything like that. It's just a very, very pleasant, joyful thing that's been happening lately. But my interpretation has been, I got to get more serious about my shadow work, or whatever I need to do to intend these things to come up. Maybe I'm not really processing.
Well, it's all good. First of all, it's not necessary for us to have drama in order to get free. It can just be very clean. So what you're doing, what he's talking about is a meditation that's called, what about the monster?
Well, dissolving.
Dissolving the monster archetype, yes, right. Which is in the back of the book in the appendix. And it's there because this monster archetype is something that I was raised with very intimately. I'm very intimately familiar with it because it was this aspect of the subconscious mind of all Germans back then, or at least I can probably say all Germans. That doesn't mean all Germans by far were aware of it, right? But it's there because of the history of the Holocaust. The two were having started and lost 2 world wars would have been enough. The last one, an absolute disaster, absolute suicide mission. But then on top of that, news of the Holocaust, and the whole nation somewhere started sensing that there was something really dark and horrible inside of them, right? That's what we call the monster archetype. And that's also a factor in all addictions. So an addiction itself, first you just have a beer, big deal, and then slowly the alcohol takes over, or whatever drug it is, it takes over and it begins to control you, right? That's when it turns into a monster. I talked to cocaine and crack addicts. I used to treat them. And they are in love with what they call the white lady, which, they snort it and it gives them this really incredible experience. And then that white lady very quickly turns into this black monster that is sucking the life force right out of them, right? Monster archetype. So there's this meditation in the back of the book that you can use to get to free yourself of that monster archetype, right? So basically what you're doing is open attention, and if you can, bring in some heart sourcing, right? The open attention goes through the body sensations that are caused by emotions, right? This is how the setup is, right? We understand that emotions, negative emotions, create body sensations. We focus on the location of the body sensation. We open to it, and we pay attention to it. And if we want to take it further, we bring the power of the heart into it and send the love inside of us, or light, if you imagine it, into the place of the tension, right? And then we simply watch that process. It's not that we are trying to get rid of anything. It's that we set the stage for internal healing that is facilitated by love and attention and presence. Now, in your case, you say you just feel the physical tensions. Perfectly fine.
Right. It's vibrational. What's happening,
yes.
Not images or clarity.
You don't need the whole package. The less, the better.
Right.
You see? If I have some trauma, let's say, and I can heal that without going back into my memory to the actual event, because it just feels like this, pressure, lump of pressure, or clog of fear or something like that, right? But I don't have to go back to the experience, and maybe I don't even know it's fear, but it's just sort of this discomfort here, right? Or wherever in the body, right? And I can just work with that and free myself of it without having to, in a subtle way, get re-traumatized, which happens with the psychological techniques where you have to go back and kind of relive it, right? Well, even better for you, you see? Now, the only thing that matters is your sincerity in your intention to get free of the roots of this. Then perhaps you don't have to experience anything other than the body tensions. You work with those, you allow them to dissolve when they're ready, and you're free of it. If you have to experience more, like where did it come from or what is it about, then those experiences will come to you in due course. Trust that. The important thing is that commitment to your freedom, that you say, I will not let myself save up some of that in my subconscious mind so it can sprout back like a weed. No, I will get free now. I will do this 100%. Right? When you have that sincerity and you know what you're doing with the skills, perfect. Then the less it takes shape, the better. Who cares? To know where it came from. We want to be free of it. That's the point. Right? You had something else?
Well, it was about death. So I was just saying that for me, I would have pain about thinking, even though like I'm on this journey where I realize that I'm deeper than my thoughts and all that, if somebody that I love doesn't recognize that and they leave their body not knowing that, then are they going to take their painful thoughts with them?
Well,
the thing that gives me peace is that they don't, because that's part of the body, right?
Yeah, see,
The
who
thought.
dies? What dies?
It's only the body with those thoughts, but the depth of the heart is what remains. So they are
Exactly.
relieved of all of the pain, physical
Absolutely.
and emotional, right?
And of their illusions.
Right.
Like, we have the true self, picture it. It's not a thing, okay? It's a presence in your innermost core. And around that we have the layers of stressful thoughts, ego stuff, emotions, etc., right? All the way to the body. What dies is all of these layers. The body dies, the energetic body, which is expressed through your behavior, dies, the emotional body dies, the thinking mind is gone, right? The ego is gone. What remains is that presence. And that presence is both aware and loving. That's its nature, right? Now, if that person was closed to the love, if they couldn't feel it, if they had some kind of trip going on in their head and they didn't overcome it, then, maybe they leave their body and it just dissipates. Who knows what the grace of God can do? Maybe they have a pattern that they're not done with and they have to come back into another form and work that out. But that'll be a different life and has nothing to do with you. What you can do is just love them. And that is more helpful and more beneficial than we know. The story with my father, and across the Atlantic Ocean, there he was, and we had this moment of love as he was leaving the body. Way beyond my mind, I couldn't imagine something like this. But the reality gives us these gifts. So your capacity to love can reach anywhere, and reach, through dimensions. So keep them in your heart. Maharaji said, the worst punishment is to throw someone out of your heart. So let's not do that. And if you can think of someone with whom you have done that, go back to that and fix it. Just if just in your mind. You don't have to live in awareness that there are some people whom you, on a feeling level, identify as enemies. What for? That's a burden on you. And you may have some people who've treated you terribly or abused you or neglected you or whatever, and it may have caused you a lot of pain at the time. And if you feel still a tension or closedness around that person, well, get free of it. And you don't necessarily have to do anything with them. If you've hurt someone and you feel pain about that, then get free of that pain, use the skills, get free of the pain, and then see, does it make sense for me to make amends with that person? And if it does, sometimes it does. Sometimes it's an excellent thing. Then do that and put the whole thing to rest. And you know, a lot of times what happens is somebody has this beef with Joe, and Joe hurt me and I'm never going to talk to him again, and stuff like that. And then finally they get some kind of help and they get over it, and they call up Joe 30 years later and say, you know, I'm really sorry. And Joe said, I can't remember anything. What are you talking about? You know, I just thought it was quaint that you wouldn't call me back. I didn't understand. And here, the person I'm talking about has had this internal churning, suffering, anger for 30 years. For what? Just self-torture, but we continue it because the ego loves it, the pain body loves it, it lives for this kind of stuff. You know, so whatever pain you carry about an old relationship or something, just know this is like totally unnecessary. But you can't just pretend it's not there, because that's another thing that we do. We just sort of shove it off. Oh yeah, I'm not going to deal with her anymore. Yes, you are. If that's still inside of you on a subconscious level, you're like carrying this around inside of you like a poison pill that slowly seeps its poison into your life, into your being, and robs you of the joy of life, the love of life, the enthusiasm and the grace of God that you could feel if it wasn't for those things. Okay? So it's important for us to have this clarity, just like you expressed, you know, to want to clean the whole deck. Clean it all out. And wherever there's old pain, go after it. Don't say, oh, you know, it's not acute, it doesn't bother me right now, so I'm just going to ignore it. Right? There's a time to ignore things when you aren't ready to deal with it. Absolutely. Don't take on more than you're ready. I knew I wasn't ready to go to Auschwitz until I did. But then it was clear. I had to go there because that's where I instinctively knew I could free myself of that old pain, layers of pain, right? And it's just an incredible blessing that I don't have that anymore. I'm still just in awe. Now, what was I, 55 or so when I went there, or something like that. So for 55 years, I felt this burden. And now it's flipped into its opposite, where I instinctively, rationally, I knew this wasn't true. I wasn't even alive when all this stuff happened, right? But instinctively, deeply, on a feeling level, I identified with myself with the perpetrators, with the people who did evil things in this world, right? And as long as I did that, as long as I had this identification, I, of course, it's like I couldn't be free. It colored everything. And now when I deal with these issues, these historical issues, and the Holocaust, and I watch movies, and there are two experiences that I have. One is the profound compassion for what happened there, and that compassion is not limited to the victims. The compassion for the perpetrator actually has to be greater, because the perpetrator is in greater blindness, is more removed from grace. The victim knows they don't like it there in that position. They want to get out of it. but it's the perpetrator who is the most disturbed, right? So I can see this with profound compassion, and I identify myself on this deep feeling level now as one of the beings who helped to put an end to this madness on this planet, right? And so when I'm exposed to this topic, I feel incredible about myself, where I used to feel really lousy, you see? And this is true for any way that a problem with the past manifests inside of us, because the past is not about the past, it's about what we carry around inside of us now. So, should we do a quickie meditation? So take a deep breath and just give yourself a moment of letting it all sink in. And you can let your attention come to the heart. And settle into that space of ease in your deepest heart, interior to all troubles and stress and strife. And if for some reason you can't find that inner space of peace, then just make an attempt, set an intention to allow your awareness to slow down, to settle down, so you can feel this inner blessing. And you may or may not get there, but the intention counts. The intention expressed in this inner searching again and again will inevitably, perhaps gradually, but inevitably, get you to this place of the heart, this place of peace, this place of the ability to embrace life fully in all its aspects, while being established in the heart of peace. So take a deep breath. Namaste. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful week.
Turn it off.